Memories in Media, the crafting of a sanitized narrative of the United States in World War II. After World War II, sensing an opportunity, the media began to develop stories that would reinforce a specific message. In so doing, they left out unsavory details to craft a positive, marketable product. Memories of World War II in media have been altered in a way that is not consistent with factual historical research. These alterations have been done to support the alternative agendas of profits and propaganda. Movies give a Hollywood perspective of what the war should look like to a public eager for stories of heroes and villains, noble sacrifice and brotherhood. The primary goal of movies is to make money. Movies need to appeal to the public. A World War II movie about death, abuse, and destruction will not be long for the theater. It was important to ensure that only the proper message of positive participation in the war was being relayed. To that end, the government produced a manual for Hollywood that gave guidelines for movies produced about the war. The Government Informational Manual for the Motion Picture Industry codified a long list of do's and don'ts for Hollywood. Whenever possible, do show people making small sacrifices for victory. Do show people bringing their own sugar when invited out to dinner. Do show people carrying their own parcels when shopping. Do show people traveling on planes or trains with light luggage. Do show people uncomplainingly giving up seats to servicemen or others traveling on war priorities. Topping the list of don'ts, don't show disunity on the home front or the battlefront. The altering of memory began while the war was still raging. The American public needed to see that the losses being suffered were necessary and therefore given worth because the cause was being carried forward. Moviegoers saw heroes like John Wayne bravely leading their men against an inferior evil enemy. Americans ultimately snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, and once again, the American GI won the war. Documentary films like To the Shores of Iwo Jima showed a slightly more realistic picture, but still leaned heavily on the fact that even in the face of setbacks, the American soldier would overcome whatever obstacle they faced, that their sacrifice was not in vain, and that they would win the day. In more recent years, a new era of World War II movies seeks to provide a more accurate picture of the war. Saving Private Ryan is credited with rekindling interest in World War II. The movie starts with scenes of hyper-realism, spending the first 25 minutes showing in impressive detail the horrors of the landing on Normandy Beach. According to Lester Friedman, this D-Day sequence in Saving Private Ryan has become the model against which all subsequent combat scenes are judged. After the opening scene, the film begins to slip into a morality play. When we hear character Private Ryben ask the question, "You want to explain the math to me? I mean, where's the sense of risking the lives of 8 of us to save one guy?" This is a role reversal of the typical war movie that shows one man sacrificing for the group. In the end, though, the act of self-sacrifice portrayed is the same. The HBO miniseries Band of Brothers presents a more historically accurate view of the war, yet this well-made production still leaves out some of the more sordid activities of American soldiers. Mary Louise Roberts writes, "A common Norman joke went, with the Germans, the men had to camouflage themselves, but when the Americans arrived, we had to hide the women." Her book tells of the less than savory behavior experienced by the French civilian population when the U.S. became their liberators. Black market trading by the well-supplied Americans took advantage of the civilians who were already suffering homelessness and starvation because of years of ground combat and carpet bombing. Drunken GIs drove too fast, causing accidents that led to hundreds of civilian deaths. Civilians feared thievery, fighting, and the possibility of being sexually violated. These behaviors might cause some to ask, was the Allied liberation much better than the Nazi occupation? Kathleen Dale Colarusso writes, "Adolescents today have only a fuzzy view of World War II. They see it as ancient history or an event glorified in old John Wayne movies. They do not understand what Nazi Germany was like or why the war was fought." Colarusso's comments point out that the effect a media has in creating a chasm between what was historically accurate and what movies were teaching about the war. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor has a special place in America's collective memory. News commentators rekindled that memory when they referred to the 9/11-2001 attacks as this generation's Pearl Harbor. Both attacks caught America by surprise, and the loss of lives makes for easy comparison. Both events propelled the United States into world conflict. The 1970 20th Century Fox film Tora, Tora, Tora was one of the first major films to portray the events of that day. It remained largely faithful to the actual events, with most historical inaccuracies resulting from not having the correct ships or planes. However, its entertainment value at the time suffered because of its almost documentary-like style. Film critic Roger Ebert reviewed it this way: Tora, Tora, Tora is one of the deadest, dullest blockbusters ever made. The very word blockbuster may be too lusty to describe it. Maybe Block Tickler is more like it for this timid epic. This subject is grand enough, but the screenplay mostly concerns itself with clerks, secretaries, teletype operators, and government functionaries. The 2001 Touchstone Pictures movie Pearl Harbor intertwines romance with the Pearl Harbor attack to tell the story. The message of the film portrayed from the American perspective of pride and heroism highlights the romance of war. Historical accuracy is cast aside for the sake of producing a compelling tale. At this, it was successful, returning $449 million on a film with a production cost of only $140 million. The success of this movie demonstrates that this is the kind of movie that the public seems to want, a compelling romantic tale without the unpleasant reality of war. Movies that deal with the topic of the United States in World War II commonly make a clear distinction between the good allies and the evil Axis powers. Because of this simplistic viewpoint, they leave out the ambiguity always present in warfare. Two movies that attempt to deal with this ambiguity are The Good German and Inglourious Basterds. These films leave behind the attempt to relate historically accurate events, but instead use fiction to explore the more convoluted reality of war. The Good German's bleak view of war and those who served seems to be more of a reflection on the United States' intervention in modern world affairs, that the actions of the nation are not those of national self-sacrifice for the greater global good. They are instead done with an agenda of self-preservation and self-interest. Inglourious Basterds is not interested in telling history. This film serves as a metaphor for the way cinema has shaped history to influence the minds of viewers. By drawing parallels between the acts of the Nazis against the Jews and the way the United States has treated Native Americans, the movie highlights the moral dilemma created by viewing the world as good versus evil. The audience can enjoy watching the Nazis get what they deserve because their acts were so evil that cruel and unusual punishment is justified. This film points out that all men have the potential for evil acts. Yet these two movies are also an example of how cinema is used to promote specific agendas, as opposed to providing complete historical narratives. Other forms of media that have the potential to alter memory are written and oral histories. These are the personal accounts of the U.S. experience in World War II. However, they need to be examined with some skepticism and awareness of their subjectivity. Stephen Chu writes, "The claim that eyewitness testimony is reliable and accurate is testable, and the research is clear that eyewitness identification is vulnerable to distortion without the witness's awareness. The assumption that memory provides an accurate recording of experience, much like a video camera, is incorrect. Memory evolved to give us a personal sense of identity and to guide our actions. We are biased to notice and exaggerate some experiences and to minimize or overlook others. Personal histories are susceptible to embellishment with the intent of making for a better story." General Douglas MacArthur provides an example of how self-promotion can distort reality. He is remembered as a general who famously said, "I will return." Newsreels such as General MacArthur returns to the Philippines show him triumphantly returning to island after island as his forces fought their way back to the Philippines, yet that portrayal was not always the view that some under his command held. A personal relative, Gordon Callender, related his experience meeting General MacArthur. He was excavating on the beach when Dugout Doug was disembarking from the troop transport. That was the nickname used by those in his unit for General MacArthur. Robin Daigle writes, "MacArthur only visited his troops in Bataan once on January 10, 1942. Some viewed this as cowardice and lack of leadership, at a time when his men needed a morale boost. This earned him the nickname Dugout Doug, as in hiding inside a tunnel while his troops faced death." This image of MacArthur was not widely portrayed during his life, as it would have tarnished his reputation. In modern times, it would diminish his legacy as one of our heroic figures, and without these larger-than-life examples, our national pride would be damaged. A first-hand account, considered historically accurate, is With the Old Breed by E.V. Sledge. This biography is based on notes taken as the events in Sledge's life were unfolding. Sledge tells us in his own words, "I have done extensive research with published and unpublished histories of documents pertaining to my division's role in the Peleliu and Okinawa campaign. I have been amazed at the vast difference in the perception of events recounted in these narratives as contrasted to my experience on the front line. Sledge recognized that perception determines how the individual remembers events. Even when one is attempting to be as accurate as possible, an individual can only relate events from their personal experience, making their memory subjective. Memory is powerful, as it can be manipulated to fulfill a specific agenda. Memory is also fragile, as it can fade with time or be lost for posterity as those who have lived it passed away. Manipulation of memory can relegate the true narrative of World War II to another tragic casualty of war." Thank you.